Next up, welcome Reed Lockwood, here to talk about traps,
Hello.
which is exciting.
All right.
Yeah, take it away.
Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Reed Lockwood, and this is Common Pitfalls of Roguelike Traps and How to Circumvent Them, an exploration of an oft-overlooked mechanic. So who am I? Oh, this is an older version of my slides. Okay, well, pretend that there's a picture of me right there. It looks a lot like me. Um, so I'm Reed Lockwood. I'm a software engineer by day and also a software engineer by night. I'm working on a subterranean non-combat farming and exploration roguelike titled Subterrestrian. It's still very early on in development, but you can follow me at Twitter at skeleton_hugs to just get updates on development and see some screenshots, which are supposed to be in this, but are not for technical reasons. So I had a picture of my bunny in there. Okay, so why traps? So traps, they're simultaneously sort of a ubiquitous mechanic in traditional roguelikes, but they're also they feel like they're overlooked a lot of the time, right? Um, so I think they have the potential to give your roguelike dungeon a flavor as like a hazardous place with character, rather than just a bunch of kind of empty rooms to fight monsters in. Um, and so another thing is that many of the designs in this talk aren't really new. There are a lot of these things have been done before in one form or another, but I want to kind of create a palette that you can sort of draw on to just get some ideas for your own game, perhaps. Okay, so let's talk about like the hypothetical worst possible trap, right? So we've seen the little carrot symbol. So it just kind of springs out at you with no warning. It does X damage. It happens instantly. It affects only one space, and it affects only the player. So this is sort of hypothetical. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head if there's any traps that are exactly like this in any of like kind of the well-known traditional roguelike games. But you see how like everything sort of like trends towards this, right? So why is this bad? So this amounts to just like kind of a hit point tax for traveling over unexplored dungeon tiles, and this leads to sort of what you might call like boring or tedious gameplay, where either you're carefully mapping out where you want to go and where you have been, or you just sort of put your set your stats up in such a way that either traps can't really are doing less to you, like giving yourself more hit points or more perception, or like however it works mechanically in your game, right? So I mean, so there are traps in regular video games, right? Like I guess like the thing that comes to my mind is like the big swinging log from Bloodborne, right? But like so in most games they sort of rely on like the real time nature of these games, right? So with traditional roguelikes, you have a turn based game, right? So um, there's no reaction time, right? So you know 100% that your character is going to move out of the way before unless there's some sort of randomness, but it's not your player skill, it's the skill of your character and the attributes of your character which are determining if they can dodge the trap or whatever, right? And then secondly, traditional roguelikes have kind of symbolic graphics, or what I'm calling symbolic graphics. If anyone has a better term for it, I'd be happy to discuss it. But what I'm trying to get across here is that so you're seeing something like this, right? You're seeing a bunch of symbols which have sort of been interpreted for you from like a game world that probably looks something more like this, right? If it was rendered as like a 3D scene or something like that, right? So with this, right, you can't look at the scene and interpret like what's going on, a hole in the wall or a tripwire or something, and say to yourself, "Oh, there's a trap there." You have to rely on your in-game character to have that sort of perception score or those skills or whatever to determine that like they see that trap or not. And then it's rendered in this ASCII art or like sort of simple symbolic graphics. It's rendered as a discrete object in the game world, right? So I'm not sure if I'm really getting that across correctly, but hopefully you get the idea. So let's go back to this. So I also broke these down. So I broke these 5 categories down, right? Of like aspects of this trap which are sort of bad design in my opinion. This can be further sort of categorized into 2 sort of categories here. So the first one is that this trap is unfair, right? And then the second one is that it doesn't necessarily make the game that much more interesting, right? So the rest of this talk is sort of just going through each of these 5 categories and trying to think about like how can we improve the trap in this way, right? How can we improve this aspect of the roguelike trap? Oh, okay. And so one more thing. When you have the trap above, right, it's just one tile where everything's happening. But you can consider the trap as 2 separate parts which are working together, right? You have the trigger, which is like a pressure plate on the floor or a tripwire or something like that, some sort of magic field. And then that's connected to a hazard or a set of hazards, right? Which are the things which are actually damaging like your character, like this like crossbow in the picture or whatever ridiculous device you can come up with. All right, so with that in mind, let's go into sort of the meat of this talk here. All right, so how to detect a trap. One of the common things that I've seen suggested for this are just to not hide the traps. I think that's interesting, but I think you can do other things as well. So and keep in mind with the hazard and trigger and hazard separation, you could hide maybe like one of those, like hide the trigger, but not hide the hazard, right? So like in this illustration, you see there's this sort of grate on the floor. So you might see that and think, okay, well, there's something fishy going on, but I don't know what's going to happen, right? Baited traps. Some kind of a funny convention of roguelikes is that there are just treasure or whatever item in like sitting in the middle of the floor. But I mean, think about that. Like why is that there? Maybe it's put there as some sort of lure or a bait for a trap, right? The remains of previous victims could be there, or other signs of a trap going off, right? You could have like messages that say like, oh, you can smell something or you feel a draft or something like that. Blood, bones, soot, other signs that something has, like a trap has gone off, right? Or even a lack of dirt. If there's like a fungus coating the dungeon floor, maybe there's a clean spot, right, where a trap has activated. And then so the above, these are all sort of passive ways of detecting a trap, right? But what about like more active ways? So having your traps be triggered by thrown items is one sort of seems obvious, but not often implemented. And then also traps that can be detected by like some sort of limited use item, right? So if you have like chalk dust that your character can sort of throw across a space and like detect maybe like a tripwire or a vent that's there. Okay, and then so let's think about doing more to the player than just damaging them, right? So this is pretty common. This is a pretty common one, right? You see like paralysis traps or poison traps a lot already. And then you can also do things like affect their inventory, burning scrolls, having like steel weapons like yank out of their hands, like due to some magnetic force. I would just one caveat. I'd think if you have a game where you don't have inventory effects and you suddenly add them, I think that can potentially be really unbalancing. Oops. Sorry, there's get control. There we go. So you can have a trap that moves the player around the dungeon, like teleportation, conveyor belts, sort of like Pokemon rushing water or something like that shoots. And I think the most important thing is that, like, you should tie your traps into the game system, right? Or game systems, right? So this talk sort of assumes that your roguelike has, the sort of the systems that most do, right? Like you have like combat, hit points, you have monsters, if you want to call that a system, right? But you have those elements, right? But say you have a religion system in your game. Perhaps there's a trap that attracts the ire of like a certain deity. You could have a trap that fools around with a reputation system and makes a faction hate you. So just kind of like think about it in that way, right? Okay, timing. As I said before, because traditional roguelikes are turn-based, there's not a whole lot. I mean, this is somewhat ineffective by itself, right? So I'm talking like if you have like a swinging axe blade that like periodically crosses a certain spot, right? If that by itself is not effective because unless there's some sort of like random chance for your move speed, right, that affects your move speed, with 100% certainty that your character is going to be out of the way before that axe will swing across, right? But if there's other stuff going on in the dungeon, like you're fighting like a monster or something like that, it will make the game more interesting because you have to sort of think about how the two things interact, and you have to make tactical choices about it, right? And then there's also traps that take time to go off, like rooms that fill with water, walls that close in, rolling boulders, it's stuff like that. Okay, so dungeon manipulation, just changing like the dungeon level, right? Adding hazards like fire or puddles of acid. Water traps I think are good because you can have a bunch of other knock-on effects like aquatic monsters, just like affecting move speed. Darkness or fog, like visibility. Reconnecting the map, like opening up new spaces or closing them off. Then finally, monster interaction, which I think is kind of the most interesting thing, right? So like traps that can injure monsters, right? Or which monsters know about which traps. Maybe some of these monsters, if they're intelligent enough, are even the ones setting the traps, right? Traps that summon monsters, having a captured monster that can spot traps for you, or conversely, a friendly monster that will lead you into a trap, right? Monsters that dart back into like a trapped lair or something. Monsters that will set traps off on purpose, especially if like those traps, they know that those traps won't affect them. Okay, here we go. So conclusions. So there's plenty of room to innovate on traps. I think it's a rewarding space to explore, which can really like add flavor to a dungeon. Just remember the two axes of fairness and complexity. Multi-tile traps tend to be better, just from going through this. And then design trap encounters holistically with monsters and systems in mind. Sorry, we're short on time here. I like to acknowledge these resources, which I use to make this thing. And thank you to the Roguelike Celebration staff. Hopefully you guys can ask me questions later. Cool.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reed. Good job keeping that tight.
I know.
Quick 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, and so the warrior room, if you end up being around in chat, and then I'm sure people can also find ways to reach out. And yeah, thank you. That was an information dense 15 minutes. I love it.